Welcome back, everyone, to the House of Hustle podcast here on Sports Radio 810. We are presented, as always, by our friends at Charlie Hustle, where vintage gear is made fresh, as well as Capital Investment Management, providing financial and wealth management services. My name is Jarrett Sutton. I'm joined, as always, by Steven St. John. And, Steven, we got a draft to recap. We got free agency starting. It feels like basketball's kind of coming to a close now. Finals is done. The NBA playoffs is done. Now the draft is done. We look forward to Summer League. And then basketball kind of goes on a hiatus until the Olympics. So a lot to catch up on and with the draft and with free agency as we start this pod.
So am I allowed to ask you about the big trade the Pelicans made?
We can talk about it now, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
How about the big trade the Pelicans made?
I'm excited. I'm very excited. Getting DeJounte Murray, proven scorer, elite guard. I think led the league in game winners last year. Really dynamic basketball player, both ends of the floor. Big time talent. He's still young. It was a move that, we're getting ready to go into the draft and knowing maybe what would be ahead, and just kind of how the roster was going to shake up. It was a big week last week for us. Draft and yes, the trade that was released on Sunday. Not made official yet, but I'm definitely excited about adding a player like DeJounte, who's been so good as a pro. He's going to be good for us. I think it's just pairing him with Zion and pairing him with Trey Murphy and CJ. It's going to take pressure off of CJ as a guy that can maybe be more of a primary ball handler for us.
And that's why you collect assets, right?
That's exactly right.
When a guy like that becomes available, then you've got all the ammunition you need to make that trade.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a time to be aggressive, and I think going into the offseason, that was sort of a message that was relayed to us both publicly and just to our staff with Griff. Want to be more aggressive, and we've been aggressive over the last week. And, I mean, I think it even includes getting into the second round. We didn't have a second-round pick, traded into the second round, and got a shooter in the second round, got a really good player in the first round as a center. We needed to address bigs in our front court, and we did that as well. So, really it's, you hate to see players go. That's the biggest thing. Like trading Dyson Daniels and E.J. Liddell, those are 2 draft picks of ours in 2021. They're going to be good players, but, this is just the value of what you have to give up to get a player like DeJounte's caliber. And DeJounte was a player our pro guys really wanted to identify at the trade deadline. It wasn't able to happen. But we've had love for DeJounte, and for us to get the deal done as free agency started. He's excited. We're excited. It's going to be a really good fit, I think.
Okay, so let me throw out a couple of free agent signings.
Yeah.
And just tell me what you think, whether they surprised you, you're surprised by the team, or surprised by the contract, or any thoughts. Paul George, 4 years, $212 million with the 76ers.
Yeah. I think Paul George to the Sixers, it's a great get for them. I was a little bit surprised that, with the Clippers, their situation, this is a conversation for every team right now, is just the tax and the apron. And, the Clippers are right up pressed against that. It does kind of hamstring you for things you can do into the future with draft capital, with trades. And so, I think when you look at the contract figures, a lot of money for Paul George. I think the Clippers had explored, all options with the team that they had with Paul George and with Kawhi. Now they made another decision with James Harden, obviously, and kind of moved in a different direction as a primary ball handler and scorer, and wanted to go with Harden over Paul George, and Paul goes to Philly, and is paired with Tyrese Maxey and Embiid. That's a really strong dynamic, trio there of players. I think this is something we're seeing right now in the NBA with free agency, is teams that are being super aggressive to compete. And you're seeing it in the West, you're seeing it in the East. You're looking, even what the top teams, Oklahoma City and Boston, what they're doing. Boston re-signing Jason Tatum to the richest contract in NBA history. Teams are really, really looking at free agency to try to improve their team and be competitive, because what we've seen from both the East and the West last year, especially in the West, is just so competitive, and you got to try to match that. And I think teams aren't messing around, and you're seeing that with Philly and the deal they made with Paul.
So you mentioned James Harden.
Yeah.
Always a team willing to pay for James Harden.
I know.
2 years, $70 million, the Clippers.
Yeah.
Should there always be a team willing to pay for James Harden?
I mean, he's talented, right? Like he's kind of tough to figure out because, you get the good with the bad a little bit. But he's still a proven commodity in the NBA. There's still a question mark around him in the playoffs, and him taking your team to the next level. But the reality is, I think it's a good fit for him to go back to LA, actually. I think he fits better with the Clippers, all things considered. And I think, honestly, he knows Philly is really Tyrese Maxey's team with Embiid. Like, it is Embiid's team, but Tyrese Maxey is their premier guard. Paul George fits Tyrese Maxey probably a little better than James Harden fits Tyrese Maxey in terms of just being ball dominant. I think from the Clipper standpoint, he matches with Kawhi a little bit better. But yeah, another deal for James Harden. It was a splash. I didn't think he would probably go back to Philly, to be completely honest, and he goes back to LA. It's a better fit for him. I think he's more comfortable there, and we'll see kind of how it plays out. But ultimately, I mean, Philly getting Paul George, maxing with Tyrese and Embiid, I think is a really good fit.
I'm just going to pick and choose here. We can't hit all of them, but there are a few that caught my eye. I wanted to ask you about. What about Kentavious Caldwell-Pope going to Orlando, 3 years, $66 million?
Yeah, well, it goes back to Denver, letting him walk and trying to stay away from the apron, and Orlando had targeted him. I think we kind of knew that was going to happen. He's a valuable player, and he's a proven shot maker. I think everybody's trying to find a KCP type of player, whether it's in the draft or in free agency, a guy that can make shots, can play off the ball, can play both ends of the floor, and adds value in just being able to be a knockdown weapon. And he adds that type of shooting to Paolo Banchero and to that team that Orlando has that had a good year last year, that I think they're looking to make the next step in their program in the East. And you add a proven veteran player that can make shots. You're adding it around Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, who is a very talented young player. They're a young group, and they need veterans, and KCP is going to be able to allow that championship pedigree there with KCP. Good get. Not all that surprised. I think the surprising part is just, I wanted to see if Denver was going to try to keep him, and just ultimately, it's just too much for them to be able to afford.
Are you surprised that Chris Paul went to the Spurs?
Yes and no. I think just where San Antonio is right now, obviously they have a generational talent in Victor Wembanyama. I like it in a sense that you get a veteran, older player that's a primary ball handler, that's a passer and a creator that can take some pressure off, and you get a guy that they need point guard, and he addresses that. He is older, though, and you wonder how much gas is left in the tank for a player like CP3. But I like it in just it is a young team down there. They have really good talent. Jeremy Sohan is a good player. Devin Vassell's a very good player. Tyus Jones is right now a free agent, and I think they don't think he'll be back, and he'll probably be, from a contract standpoint, I think Tyus is probably looking at a bigger deal. So they're able to add an older veteran player that I think can help with the development of some of those young guys, especially Victor, and a position of need. So I like that for the Spurs. I was curious, though, if CP3 would go to maybe a team that was more of a playoff-ready team where he could go compete for a championship. Not to say San Antonio can't do that, but I just figured there might be some other teams out there. It's a good contract for him, and I think San Antonio targeted him long ago to try to get him.
So speaking of gas left in the tank, what about Klay Thompson going to Dallas?
I'm a little bit surprised it's not talked about enough of, like, this is the end of the Splash Brothers.
Right.
That historical run of the Golden State Warriors. When I think of Golden State, I think of Steph and Klay. And I'm curious what Steph Curry's thinking right now, to be completely honest with you, with everything that's taken place. Jordan Poole a couple years ago, now with everything pertaining to, Klay and what happened last year with, they thought they might move him at the deadline. They didn't. I thought those two would stay together. There was conversations that Clay might go to L.A., where he's from, and go to the Lakers and join LeBron. LeBron opted out of his contract, and I thought that was probably going to be where Clay ended up, and then he goes to Dallas. Clay wants to win. Clay's a serious competitor. Anytime you hear him talk, and I don't think he's just going to go run to chase the money. I don't think he's just going to go to L.A. He goes to Dallas and a team that's right there competing for a championship. Made the finals. He's able to pair pretty seamlessly, I think, with Luka and Kyrie. It's a great get for Dallas, in my opinion. You add a championship caliber player, probably a Hall of Famer, one of the best shooters of all time. I'm curious how it works with just Luka's a very ball dominant player, as is Kyrie. They were able to make that work.
Where's the shots coming from?
But you need to have that piece. Tim Hardaway really didn't play a ton in the finals. He's an older player. He goes to Detroit. They're looking to replace that, and Clay is a perfect fit for that. Now, the big question mark is, can Clay get back consistently to form with his shooting, with his ability to score it as he was able to score it when he was with the Warriors? He is a very good defender, too. I'd like to see him get back to that part of the ball where he can guard and be kind of that. I don't think he'll be a shutdown guy as much as he was early on in his career, but I still think he can provide value on that end of the floor. But the shot making and the scoring, he's still got a lot of juice left in the tank. But can he do it consistently? Because as we saw last year, he was a little bit up and down. And obviously health will be the biggest part of the equation with Clay.
All right, so there's other free agent signings. Those are some of the headlines I just want to get your thoughts on. Now, when I saw this, I knew I wanted to discuss this with you as we transition into the draft. One of the top storylines, at least around here, was Johnny Furphy, right, leaving Kansas, going into the draft and staying in the draft. And he didn't go in the first round.
Right.
And Bill Self had some quotes after that I thought were interesting. I'll read to you. And he said, last night was a very tough and humbling night for Johnny. The anticipation of being in the green room and the assurance that he and his representation had been told that he would be drafted didn't turn out that way. It was a tough night. I thought Johnny handled it very maturely and very well, but it was not easy for he or his family.
Yeah.
And that was after he didn't go in the first round. Of course, he went in the second round. But when you hear those are some pointed comments from Bill Self.
No doubt.
And, we've all seen players in different sports get bad advice or leave when maybe they should have stayed. What do you take away from Bill Self's comments, and specifically, what did you think of where Furphy ended up going?
So he goes to the Pacers. He was drafted by the Spurs, but ultimately gets traded to Indiana. I like the fit there for him. I think when you look at Kevin Pritchard, Kansas ties, I think there's something to be said for that. Look, he's still going to get guaranteed money. So, it's different when you fall into the 40s and you're looking at probably a two-way contract. Most back end of the second round contracts are two ways. So Johnny's still going to get guaranteed money. That's good. I was very surprised he fell to the second round. Was not expecting that. I think most teams didn't expect that. There were some guys that went in the first round that were big-time surprises, and we can get to those. But
who was the biggest surprise?
A.J. Johnson was one for me. A kid that played in Australia. He turned down playing in college. Didn't really play a ton down in Australia. He showed well in Chicago at the Combine, but he's still very young and raw, and he is far away from playing in an NBA game. But, he's talented. But Johnny Furphy's in the same conversation, and A.J. Johnson went to the Bucks. What was that at 23? Pacome Dady is another developmental play, goes to the Knicks at 25. Keyshawn George goes 24 to the Knicks, developmental play. Dylan Jones from Weber State went to the Wizards, was traded to the Thunder at the 26th pick. Dylan Jones was probably an early second-round guy for most guys, and he goes in the late first. So it's just kind of how the end of the first round really shaped up. It really 22 to 26, those picks were not surprises necessarily. Like DeRon Holmes going in the first round was probably expected, but some of those other picks, that takes away, guys like Johnny Furphy, guys like Kyle Filipowski. Those guys were probably first-round guys, and all along, that's probably where they thought their range was. We were at 21, and we didn't think Johnny Furphy would be there at 21, and he ended up being there at 21. Now, there were some other players that fell too, and when you're working the board, we took Yves Missy, and Yves Missy was very high. We looked at him as a future center down the road. So it's all dependent on team board. I still believe you go best talent, but sometimes you get, the comments and conversation around, you got to address areas of need, especially when you're going into free agency and you got to address a position. So ultimately, definitely surprising Johnny Furphy fell. I don't think it has to be looked at as like, well, he wasn't a first-round pick, so he should have gone back to Kansas and stayed at Kansas. I don't know. I don't know if I'll go there because I think if he goes back to Kansas, next year's draft is loaded. It has got tons of talent, especially at the top. You never know how next year would go for Johnny Furphy. Does he get hurt? There's all these things you have to look at that, you never know how next year is going to go. And Kansas got loaded up with talent. A.J. Storr plays Johnny Furphy's position, basically. So you got to think about all those things. And the reality is Johnny Furphy can kind of start his NBA clock. He'll probably play a lot in the G League, yes. But there's a chance he gets on a floor, down the road. In today's NBA, with 82 games, guys get hurt, guys miss time. You have to call guys up from your G League team, and they got to play in an NBA game. Johnny Furphy's probably going to be in this conversation. So I still believe in Furphy in terms of what he might be able to bring to the NBA. He's super young. He's athletic. He's mobile. He's 6'9". He can make a shot. He's very smart without the basketball. I think he's going to be a solid defender as he gets stronger. So let's just see how he develops. I still think it was right for him to probably come out. Just the fact that he went 35, a little bit surprising. I still think he should have gone the first round, but he is getting guaranteed money, and that's ultimately why you stay in the draft.
All right, and Jarrett, the other Kansas player that was drafted, Kevin McCullough, and I actually love this fit because he gets drafted by Phoenix, but then is traded to the Knicks. Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed watching the Knicks play, even though they're now Villanova,
right,
almost fully.
Right.
But what about getting a defender like McCullough for the Knicks? Look, you got to play defense, and you got to try to match up against the Boston Celtics to come out of the East. What about that? It seems like a very good fit with the Knicks and Kevin McCullough Jr.
For sure. It's unfortunate Kevin goes late second because he had such a good year at Kansas and showed such drastic improvement offensively before the injury.
That might be a steal for the Knicks.
Absolutely. The medical was a question mark with Kevin with the knee situation that was plaguing him at the end of the season at Kansas, forced him out of the NCAA tournament. He had to get it operated on. Hopefully he's fully healthy and doesn't have any setbacks. The way Kevin plays, any team would want a Kevin McCullough type of player. Every team's looking for wings that have his level of aggression, his level of intensity, his motor, his toughness, his compete level, how he guards. He's versatile. He can switch. He's a very good attacking wing. The shooting thing will be a question mark for sure because he just has an unorthodox stroke. It's a little bit slower. He's going to have to speed that up at the NBA level. But, where the Knicks are able to get him is great. It's significant value when you think about most teams probably saw Kevin McCullough in a 25 to 35 range prior to him getting hurt. He wasn't able to work out for teams. He was able to interview. That always the draft, the pre-draft process is always interesting because you end the college season or the international season and you start up the combine, you start up the workouts, you start up the interviews, you start up the medical, and then things really shift for teams. And every team values things differently. And so, I think we all probably talked about Kevin McCullough if you had a second-round pick. But ultimately it came down to just the availability. He has had injury issues in the past. So he's got that to prove and just, being durable and being able to stay on the floor. But ultimately the player, and at his size, with his athleticism, he's a hard-nosed dude, and you will take that without question. So for him to go 56, I do have to say, I felt bad for him getting selected, and he was right after Bronny James. So he gets picked, and it's Bronny James highlights for Kevin McCullough getting selected. That was a little bit – I felt bad for him there. But in terms of where the Knicks get him, and I think where the Knicks see him, he might be able to help them in a role, off the bench at some point.
And there's the next question. He goes one spot behind Bronny James. And, of course, my producer, Jake, my producer of New Day with SSJ, wanted me to ask you about this. Jake has turned his back on the Lakers, a lifelong Lakers fan.
Oh, boy.
He said if they end up hiring J.J. Redick and drafting Bronny James, he's done being a Lakers fan. So they hired J.J. Redick
2 for 2
and drafted Bronny James.
Yeah.
Let's just cut through all the crap here.
Yep.
Is he a draft-worthy prospect, or is this just LeBron forcing the Lakers to draft his son?
Yeah, that's a hard question for me to answer just because, I think you have to kind of take away all the noise, which is very difficult to do. I do think Bronny, and I said this on your show, I think Bronny's a good kid. I think I think he gets it. I think he understands what's going on. I didn't feel like he had a level of entitlement, which is probably good. And who knows? Maybe he's just coached up for that. You never know. But
if his name was Ronnie James, and he was from Omaha, Nebraska,
exactly, might be a little different.
Would he have been drafted?
I mean, to think of some of the players that went undrafted, I think it's a definite conversation of all along I knew that the Lakers probably were going to take him here. So it didn't really feel like...
Most people did except for Jake.
For Jake, yeah. Look, I feel like if you went and watched USC play and Bronny James, if you didn't know who Bronny James was and he comes in the game, he's probably a guy that probably would have stayed in college. He's a guy that came off the bench. He could make a three. I actually think he's a very good defender. He's a good athlete. He has gotten better since high school. But in terms of this draft and, being a selected here, I think you can kind of read between the lines of, where it was going. We knew it was going to happen, too. It wasn't a necessarily a surprise. The thought of, the broadcast, and we all caught it, of, the moment everybody's been waiting for. I mean, that was a little bit extreme of, were we waiting for this moment? I don't know. I don't know if maybe some people were.
Kinda,
I don't know.
Just because I told Jake it was going to happen.
Just because of the drama, I guess.
And I wanted him to be angry, so I'm sorry.
And how angry it makes people, I guess. But I think I'll leave it up for interpretation of him going 55. And should he been a draft prospect, I'll let people make that decision themselves.
Something else I thought was interesting, we saw Zach Edey dominate in college.
Yeah.
But I didn't see a whole lot of mock drafts having him go in the top 10.
Correct.
I don't think I saw any having him go in the top 10.
Yep.
And so you got Klingon, who went number 7, and then Edey went number 9. And we've wondered, are we going to see a rebirth of the big man at the NBA level the way we've seen this at the NCAA level? So, hey, look, there was a time – then those guys would have been battling to go number 1 overall, right?
Right.
Back in the day.
Yep.
But they both went in the top 10.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I know they're different players, but they're both true centers. How do you think they will perform at the next level?
I think that both Klingon and Edey are kind of the bigs that you look at in this draft. Alex Sarr is a big. He went 2 overall. Khalil Ware went 15. He's another big. We took Yves Missy at 21. He's a big. So the thing with Klingon and Edey, they are your old school bigs. And I think it's interesting because I think Zach Edey is very skilled. I think he doesn't move like Donovan Klingon. Klingon's a little bit more mobile. Obviously Klingon's bigger in terms of height. I do think Klingon defensively is probably what Portland really sees of a big that can protect the rim, an anchor, and a drop coverage. The swing skill that's I have to circle in this conversation is Donovan Klingon to me can shoot. He shot it well in Chicago. Portland loved how he shot it in their pre-draft workout, and he didn't really shoot a lot of threes at UConn. And the modern-day game, if you're a big and can shoot, that opens up so much more in terms of your upside and how you can maybe reach your full potential. Zach's probably not that, although I think Zach has touch, and that always bodes well. But Zach Edey is the one you circle in the draft going top 10. and just his dominance of college basketball, how he fits in an NBA game is not ideal, but he is still like highly durable. He's very strong. The minutes he played and the usage and the level of physicality he took in college to be as efficient as he was year in and year out. He's an underrated passer. How Purdue played like schematically with their system, it's going to be much different. You're talking about, Zach Edey playing with John Morant in a ball screen or playing in a dunker. Zach can do that. The question will be like games he can't play just because of the defensive assignment and playing against teams that can space you and spread the floor, and how does he fit in that type of situation? It reminds me of Jonas Valanciunas. Just there's going to be D&Ps probably, but I do think there's a place for Zach Edey in the league, and I'm really fascinated to see how this goes. He's different than Klingon to me. Zach's got so much touch with both hands and skill. He has great feel. Klingon's younger. Klingon's also had injury issues. Klingon is a great finisher and lob threat, but can he develop that touch around the rim? Can you throw him the ball in an NBA game against NBA defenders and NBA bigs, and can he kind of create his own bucket? That's kind of what he's got to prove. But again, if he can step out and shoot the ball, it adds so much more to him and how he'll impact an NBA game. So those two guys I'm really interested about. The Tijadine Saloon kid from Chalette that went 6th, that was a big surprise for him going in the top 10. Zach Edey was probably not in the conversation with a lot of teams in the top 10. You started to hear some noise that, Miami liked him, the Bulls liked him, and then all of a sudden he goes 9 to Memphis. To me, that means Memphis thought, we need a big. We don't think he's going to be there later on. Let's take him now, and they take him at 9. And we'll just see how it plays out. I'm really fascinated to see kind of how he fits with Memphis, how that staff incorporates him around a ball-dominant guard like Ja. But he's a finisher. He's strong. He's physical. Can he protect the rim on a consistent basis? Zach got better with not fouling. So he's very smart. And just how he competes and how he plays. You saw him in the national championship game. Like, he went to Donovan Klingon. He went through him in that title game. And Donovan Klingon is still younger, though. Is there another jump for Klingon? That'll be another conversation with both these guys.
There were a couple of players that college basketball fans would recognize. And look, that's the interesting thing about the draft. College basketball fans can be very lost.
Absolutely.
In this thing.
No doubt.
Because that's not the path. That's not the only path. That may not even be the best path anymore to the NBA. But two names that were very recognizable. I want to ask about what you thought about where they went. For as much as they were criticized for taking Bronny, I thought Dalton Connect, number 17 overall, was really interesting.
Yep.
I mean, he was one of the best players in the nation at Tennessee. And then the Celtics with the last pick of the first round, Baylor Shireman, a guy we talked a lot about from Creighton. And I thought about you with both those picks. I said, I bet Jarrett likes that pick. I bet Jarrett likes that pick. Yep. So what about those two picks going to high-profile teams? Because I do, you know what? I do still like seeing highly productive players in college basketball get paid off for production, for what they do, right?
And staying in school.
Right, absolutely. And so what do you think about those two?
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked with where Dalton Connect lands. It probably helped us a little bit in terms of Yeezy Missy, because with the Lakers picking at 17, I thought they'd take a big. But the fact Dalton fell, and you just at some point you couldn't pass on one of the best shooters and best scorers in a league like the SEC, like Dalton Connect. I think he fits the Lakers perfectly because you identify a guy that can play right away. He comes in, he makes shots. He's much better. He's much more than a shooter. Like, I think if you watch college basketball and you watch Tennessee play, Dalton Connect is probably not the best athlete in the draft, but he's definitely a guy that can score the ball in different ways. And he's just an underrated basketball player. Like, he really does a lot of. The question will be, can he guard at the NBA level? But in terms of like the right fit and the right guy you want to bring in that can like come off a bench and be counted on to make shots, and like he has a feel, there's IQ there. He can put the ball on the floor too. Like, he can handle and he can create his own a little bit. Not to the extent of like you're going to throw him the ball and play through him or anything like that, but he's a really good player, and the fact he falls to 17 as one of the more proven commodities of the draft, that was surprising to me. I thought he'd be a lottery pick. I think everybody thought he'd be a lottery pick, and for him to fall was interesting to me. Clearly, some teams had some question marks there, but for the Lakers to get him at 17, it's a great pick for them, high value. And then Baylor Shireman, I was selfishly hoping he would fall to the second round, but I am not surprised that he went in the late first. And if you're the Celtics, you're taking a guy like Baylor Shireman, who I love. I love Baylor Shireman. He is a double-double waiting to happen in college basketball every night. Like, he was one of the better rebounding wings in the draft. He was one of the better shooters in the draft. He's one of the smartest players in the draft. He can pass. Yeah, he's older, but he's a proven player in the Big East. And he played point guard, back in the day when he was playing against UMKC, when he was at South Dakota State. And then all of a sudden he moves to the wing and seamless and made Creighton what they were. I had him in my first round all year. And I just felt like you have a player like him. Players like him go to winning franchises. Like, they fall to the late first round, and then I think the Celtics said, there's no way we want this guy to go in there in the second round. We're taking the proven commodity who can play right away, who can help us. So the fact that you could pair him, I think Baylor Shireman has more than Sam Hauser, but Sam Hauser is an impact player for the Celtics, right? And you need guys like that can come off the bench, that can make shots. Baylor is not a great defender, not an elite defender, but he's not a stiff either. Like, I think he's going to be okay on that end. And he rebounds the ball, and you need wings that can rebound. Terrence Shannon was another big name there. I wouldn't call him a local name, but we know who Terrence Shannon is. He was at Texas Tech, played against Kansas many years. He was at Illinois, played against Mizzou, back-to-back years. There was a lot of conversation about his off-the-floor situation that got cleared up before the draft that took place in Kansas. And he started working out after he was cleared. He hit the ground running with workouts, day after day. We had him in for, I think he had 8 consecutive workouts, 8 straight days. We had him in on the 7th day, and he was great. And he is an NBA wing, NBA athlete. Had a huge year at Illinois as a shot maker. Again, these are 2 older players in Terrence Shannon and Baylor Shireman and Dalton Connect as well. That to me was kind of the draft, Stephen. It was you're taking the developmental swings at the top, hoping that you hit on the upside. Alex Sarr, Reese Shea, Saloon, even Ron Holland at 5 was very much a surprise in the NBA circle of Ron Holland going 5. That's pretty high. But then you get towards this back end and you see these guys that are there. Ryan Dunn, elite defender, elite defender out of Virginia. Isaiah Collier was the number 1 player in the class and was one of the better guards in college basketball to start the year, and he got hurt, and he falls to 29. That to me was the intrigue of the draft. If you're a casual fan, I get the draft. The top, it's not going to grab you. But if you are a basketball fan, and especially college basketball, the middle and late first round was really interesting. And some of these guys I was kind of hoping would be in the second round, and they just weren't. Kyle Filipowski fell. Mogbogo from San Francisco fell. But, these type of names, they're going to be playing in an NBA game. Like Terrence Shannon, Baylor Shireman, they're going to be playing in an NBA game next year to help their teams.
So speaking of college basketball fans, now that we're in July, all of these new teams and new conferences are official, right?
Right.
And I'm just looking. We're having some fun looking at the new standings because it's like homework for everybody. We have to figure out who's
every year, right?
Yeah,
you got to figure out who's where. Yep.
But the Big 12 was already a great basketball conference. Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado. Everyone talks about their football program. They had 2 guys that get drafted in the top 20.
Yeah,
so that's an underrated basketball program. What is but they lose Oklahoma and they lose Texas and they move over to the SEC. So now when you look at these 2 conferences we talk about from a basketball perspective, what do you think? What's this going to do to the Big 12 now? Because we've already seen Houston came in. They're not backing down anybody.
Right.
Iowa State's up and running. Arizona's a great basketball program. Utah's had success over the years.
Yep.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what to expect. I don't know if this is, Kansas is so used to dominating over the past several decades. Is it ever going to get close to back to what that was? Is there a group of powers that you see separated from everyone else? It's fascinating to try to handicap this thing. I know we got to go through football first. That's hard enough, but
Right.
this is going to be a wild basketball conference. Both of them.
Both of them. I mean, the Big 12 has always been a really good league. I even would add, like, BYU, with everything that took place with Coach Pope going to Kentucky, and their NIL program is up and running, and they got some players that are coming in from overseas.
They have men
that are talented.
30-year-old men in their line.
And I was at the BYU win in Allen Fieldhouse. So, I think that your point about the teams that came into the league last year, it elevated the Big 12 for sure. I'm fascinated about Arizona. Like that's the one from a basketball standpoint that is really, really interesting. Tommy Lloyd's done a really good job at Arizona. They've had really good teams. Now they've had exits in the tournament that are to talk about, but they've been, the last couple seasons, they've been one of the best teams in college basketball, and they've been in the top 10 consistently. Cincinnati, I think they're headed in the right direction from a basketball standpoint. When I think of Cincinnati, I think of the Jordan Brand, I think of Kenyon Martin. I think of those days with Huggy. Like that to me is the school that has a rich tradition. If you go to the University of Cincinnati, and apologies to the Kelsey brothers because I know they would say football, is just as good. But I think when I think of Cincinnati, I think of that Cincinnati basketball of the '90s and what that tradition kind of became. And they've got some players that have come through that program. They came into the league last year. I thought they showed pretty well for the most part. It's great to have Colorado back. I'm used to the old Big 12 and growing up in Kansas City with Colorado and Chauncey Billups and those type of teams that were in the Big 12. So you kind of see a reunion there of Colorado coming back to the Big 12. I like Utah. Yeah, I like Utah coming into the conference. The real thing will be like, how does Utah, how does Arizona State, Central Florida would be the other school. Like, to me, those schools can really elevate the conference because those are the schools I look at as like they're up against it. Like they're going to have a challenge a little bit. Arizona State has not so much, but they haven't necessarily reached, to me, the expectation of what I think Arizona State fans and going to the Pac-12 tournament over the last 4 or 5 years, like Arizona State fans are very passionate of like, we should be up there with Arizona. We should be a basketball school. And they've had their moments. Them coming to the Big 12, I think, is a real excitement for them because I think they have a lot to prove. I think Arizona is similar to Houston for me, of like, that's the team that's really going to be reckoned with the Kansases, the Iowa States, the Baylors, the schools that have really been there in the Big 12 year in and year out. So I like the league. I think when you flip the script and you look at the SEC, I'm excited to have Oklahoma and Texas just because of really what they bring to college athletics, the fan base of Texas and Oklahoma. It's obviously a big football drives everything. We're a basketball podcast, but it is football drives college athletics.
Eli Drinkwitz.
Shout out. Oklahoma and Texas, they provide the football side of it. I think from a basketball perspective, they're good programs. And I think last year, Oklahoma, they were right there on the cusp. Like they had a solid year. They probably didn't meet their expectation. Texas a little bit the same way. And Texas is getting a lot of talent in. Like their class, like their team next year, A.J. Johnson, like they got a chance to be pretty good in terms of adding talent. But can they meet the expectation? Can they get over the hump? Can they compete in the Big 12 with Kansas and Baylor? Because Baylor's going to be great. Like Baylor, they're reloading. And Scott Drew has that thing running. It's a machine right now. He had 2 more first-round picks this year, 1 in the lottery. So it's a good league. I think the Big 12, I view that as like they need to embrace basketball, right? SEC is football dominant. Not to take away football from Big 12, but just to me, basketball in the Big 12, they're always recognized as like they're the best basketball conference. And then do they show well in the NCAA tournament? It always comes back to being that question mark because there's a lot of people would say, hey, the Big East might be better They have UConn. UConn's gone back to back. They've had teams go a little bit farther. The SEC's been very competitive in basketball. When I was in college, it was just Kentucky and Florida. That's all the SEC was in basketball. And now, you look up and Alabama is in the Elite Eight. So that to me is what's exciting from a basketball perspective with both leagues.
Okay, so I have one more question, and then we can wrap things up. This is such a bizarre game, and I know it pissed off some Mizzou fans. But we haven't talked about this. News came out that on Thanksgiving in Kansas City at T-Mobile Center, Arkansas is going to play Illinois.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're just like a basketball fan with doesn't have a dog in the fight, like, oh, Coach Cal in Arkansas.
Yeah.
Brad Underwood in Illinois. That's a high-level basketball game. I'll go see that on Thanksgiving Day if you love basketball. But, like, if you're a Mizzou or Kansas State fan, like, why in the hell are they playing in Kansas City on Thanksgiving? And there's not, like, part of a tournament or everything. I was like, I kept waiting, like, as part of the so-and-so holiday tournament.
Yeah.
Why is this happening? It's kind of cool, but it's like, I would be pissed off. I am pissed off. Kinda.
Absolutely.
I don't know what to think.
Most Mizzou fans are.
Like, why is this happening?
It's Mizzou's, two strong rivals, and in Kansas City,
why are you allowing them to showcase things in Kansas City where they can recruit? Like, I don't
preaching to the choir too, because I'd like to see Mizzou play in T-Mobile more. I think that should be. I will
say this: when I was sitting in T-Mobile watching them against Seton Hall this past year, my thoughts were like, I don't want to see this more. I'd like to see something else, not this.
I was at that one as well.
Right.
It was rough. But that needs to be for me yearly. But you got to play in T-Mobile yearly.
Wasn't this it's bizarre?
Bizarre.
Kinda?
I was not expecting it, and it's obviously definitely Arkansas is always from just a university and enrollment. Trying to recruit. They've always tried to get into Kansas City.
Right.
Illinois has as well.
Yeah.
And so
there's a lot of kids going to Arkansas. They make it affordable. They're being very aggressive recruiting. And I'm not even talking about sports.
Yep.
Just recruiting students to go to Arkansas.
Kansas City's a special sports town, passionate sports town. I think it makes sense for both schools. And I think
you'll be scouting this game. I mean, that's
absolutely. And I think they look at it as like you got Kansas 45 minutes away. You got Mizzou. Don't think there's something there to that.
Well, right? I know. I can see why they're doing it. But
both these schools are
how did that happen?
Looking at this, like, this makes.
Like, who came up with this? Like, who? Like, what?
I'm curious if it was Calipari's idea.
I feel like it is.
I think that's what's interesting to me is how do we get a game? Because obviously it's a pivot for Calipari. Just Kentucky a little bit different in terms of like what are you really competing against in terms of market and what's around you and and obviously their recruiting is much different. Now you're looking at you're more competing against Kansas now than ever for Calipari, just in terms of proximity of trying to. He's going to get players. Bill Self's going to get players too. Right. So now it becomes even more competitive. Of like, how do we get those local players that are close by here? And Arkansas, I think, has always viewed, that trip to Kansas City as like it's a little bit closer, and they feel like they need to get in the game in terms of that Midwest talent.
Okay, next 5 years, who wins more games at their school? Coach Cal at Arkansas or Underwood at Illinois?
Oh, man. That's a great question. I'm going to go Brad Underwood. I think right now with where Illinois is at.
I kind of want this. I know I want this Cal thing to flop, but I kind of think there's a chance.
There's a chance. There's a chance. Like, it's different than Kentucky. And I still think, like, yes, the NIL and obviously why he went to Arkansas. It makes sense.
Of course.
But I still think, like, right now where both coaches are at in terms of, and I think Coach Underwood, he's had some great teams and he's had success now at multiple stops in Illinois. I think he's got humming. Like he has gotten he's done a great job on the recruiting front. They're right there. Like they're not that far apart in terms of where they currently are. Now, historically, titles and all that stuff's different. But in terms of where they are currently, it's a great question because of how Illinois compares to Arkansas in terms of the job, the resources, NIL, all these factors. And both these guys have done a really, really good job. I think it's different because does Cal change the model? Does he stay on the high school hunt, or does he pivot and go more portal front? He's still going to get talent in the high school front, but Illinois has done a really good job in terms of the transfer market. And that to me is the most fascinating part of all this. It's a great question, but I'm gonna give the edge to Underwood right now of where things are at.
Well, that's all I got. You want to finish off the podcast with anything?
Yeah, first of all, a great year of just covering the sport, right? College, men's, women's. We've had great guests. Obviously, the NBA playoffs and the draft. It's just the game never stops, and it's still not going to stop with the Olympics that are ahead. And we'll be back.
WNBA is getting better and
WNBA
better.
is rocking right now. Been following my girl Sophie Cunningham, who's had a great year, by the way, guest of the House of Hustle podcast.
We have to get her back on the podcast when I'm
absolutely. But thanks to our sponsors, with Charlie Hustle and Capital Investment Management all year supporting the podcast. Thanks to you as well, Steven. You got such a busy schedule, taking time out of your day to get with the basketball. It's even during like the Chiefs season, you come ready to go. So
hey, I love basketball, and I love being able to coach my kids and coach my girls. I've always loved basketball, but that makes me love it even more.
Yep.
Because and this, you get to basketball in the grassroots and just at the purest form of it, right? Teaching kids, coaching kids, watching high school basketball. I've had so much fun watching freshmen and JV and high school basketball. I'm like, I forget how good this is.
Yeah.
It makes you fall in love with the sport again.
I miss that. Like, I remember that as a player. I told Selena this when we were together, and she was talking about, like, how she's meeting new friends that come from different schools that are now playing on her club team. Like, that's awesome.
She's going to be JV now, so you got to come out to the Pius game.
That's why I loved playing basketball year-round, too.
And also, thanks to Ben Messer for sometimes answering text messages.
That's right. We can't leave Ben out. The show doesn't happen without Ben.
But once in a while, it's almost shocking when he answers the text. Like, hey, he's engaged.
He's got all the podcasts. That
he makes it all happen.
He makes it all happen. So, and we're in this great studio.
Yeah, this is high. This is
high level.
I'm surprised they let me in here.
So big shout out to Ben. Thank you for all you do as well.
That's
But a great year with the podcast. We're gonna take a little bit of a hiatus as we go through the off season, but won't be long. And I just have to put this out there for college basketball fans. Next year's going to be fun. There's a lot of talent coming into the college. It's going to be a little different than last year. And with like we just touched on, with the changing of the conferences and how this is going to look.
Just figure out where everyone is
It's going to be, right. It's going to be an educational experience at the beginning of trying to get up to speed of like who's on what roster. But it's going to be a lot of fun. With all the leagues around college basketball.
By the time conference play gets here, I'll have everything figured out of where all the players are and where all the teams are, because that's part of it too. But until the next episode, remember this: Kansas City is for hustlers.